Well, as you've heard from the first two speakers this morning, the AI revolution has begun again, and certainly it's gaining momentum, but it's a long, long way from achieving the promises of its promoters, and it is even further away, perhaps 50 years, perhaps never, from all of the prophecies of doom that you hear from certain very well-known people. All these prophecies about the planet being in peril, tens of millions of jobs being destroyed. I'm not a believer in either of those, and I'll talk about it this morning. I think it always helps to start with a sense of history and a sense of humility. And if you just think about technology revolutions of the past, there was the steam engine, there was electricity, there was atomic energy, genetic engineering, and at the end of each of these revolutions, as these revolutions mainstreamed themselves into society, we found that the economy was larger, people's lives were better, and the human race survived, and we're all here. So when I hear all these claims of doom and gloom, or for that matter, the other side of the coin, claims about the euphoria of this great new world AI is going to create, I'm not impressed by either side. And to me, it's all about the normal evolution of yet another technology revolution that we are seeing. I say this because there have been many previous AI revolutions. From Alan Turing in the 40s, to the Dartmouth conference in the 50s, to the work of Minsky and Alan Newell and Herb Simon in the 70s, to the rise of robotics in the 1980s, AI has been a revolution waiting to happen. Each decade, there was a promise of an AI revolution that actually fizzled out and never ultimately took hold. I remember back in the 80s, reading all kinds of articles that robotics using AI would eliminate tens of millions of jobs over the next 25 years. And here we are 35 years later, and robots have only displaced 1 million workers in the US. There are only a couple of 100,000 robots in the US, only 1 million jobs have been displaced. And compared to that, 3 million jobs have been outsourced to China in manufacturing alone. So the effect of robotics was actually less than 25% of the impact of global trade or participation in the World Trade Organization. And yet, if I replay back to the 80s, this was the then topic of doom and gloom. Now, I was sucked up in the hype myself in the 1980s. In 1981, I started a company called American Robot, which was among the first companies using a combination of intelligent robotics, artificial vision, and artificial intelligence to solve problems in manufacturing. I was actually sucked in by the hype that everyone else believed in at the time, and the market was a tiny fraction of what it was supposed to be. And even though I raised tens of millions of dollars, I worked for 10 years, probably 80, 90 hours a week, literally round the clock. The end result was a company that was at best a mediocrity, American Robot. And one day I did this horrible math of taking the $500,000 I made in my equity, divided by the number of hours I worked for 10 years, and it came down to around $13.50 an hour. So I could have been flipping hamburgers and been about as well off as I was building this so-called, great company in the robotics sector. So again, sense of humility is very important. Now, having said all that, there's no doubt that this particular AI revolution does have legs. There is a clear convergence of important technologies, cloud computing, massive amounts of computing horsepower, very large bandwidth, huge sets of data, all kinds of emerging AI tools for deep reinforcement learning and neural networks and all kinds of other, NLP and vision and so on, all available open source. So I have no doubt that this is going to be this particular revolution is likely to be successful where the previous ones weren't. But it's important to recognize that the kinds of themes that pundits and media are working with today aren't necessarily true. So as an example, one of the key topics, and this is Elon Musk's great statement on AI, is that AI is an existential threat to mankind. My feeling is absolutely not, complete myth, not going to happen. And the reason I say that is ultimately technologies are threats to mankind only if it is our intention to kill ourselves. We've lived with nuclear energy, atomic weapons for a very long time, since 1945. And even though there have been crises from time to time, we're all still here. We've seen the benefits and the risks of genetic engineering, and frankly, we are perfectly capable today of producing a superhuman using genetic engineering. We don't do it because we are self-regulating the way in which we should manipulate the genome. And frankly, if AI is going to be a threat in terms of the rise of some future generation of super intelligent machines, I can make an equal argument that genetic engineering will play a big role in the creation of the next generation of superhumans. So if there's a risk, it's the risk of future superhumans fighting future super machines. So one can't take everything Elon Musk says too seriously. The second topic that people like to talk about is the destruction of tens of millions of jobs. This comes from the McKinsey Global Institute, from Oxford University, from a whole bunch of other books and articles that have been written. And my feeling is this too is extremely overwrought. I already talked about my experience from the 80s when tens of millions of jobs were supposed to disappear, and they didn't. I think the same mistakes are being made with this set of statements and assumptions. There is an assumption that just because AI has the ability to do the work of certain kinds of white-collar workers or do some portion of the work of other kinds of white-collar workers, that 40, 50% of these white-collar jobs will be eliminated. I don't believe that's the case at all. What I do believe is that the nature of work is going to change. The content of what we do in our jobs is going to change. And there is an important need for each of us as employees to get into a mode of continuous learning. There's a great need for employers to mentor their employees in terms of the kinds of new careers that they could have in the age of AI, and prepare them for it through the right kind of skilling, through the right kinds of competences. And if we do that, there will certainly be a transformation in the nature of the job, but overall, I don't believe there will be a dramatic reduction in the number of jobs. In fact, if you look at two important studies, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is forecasting that 10 years from now, there will be 167 million people employed in the US compared to 156 million last year, so a gain of 11 million jobs, even in the face of AI over the next 10 years. And if you look at a major study from Accenture, they're projecting that AI will actually improve GDP by 2% a year, and this in turn translates to the creation of literally millions of new jobs. So yes, there will be some offsetting effects, no doubt. There will be disruptions, no doubt. There will be winners and losers. There will be people whose jobs are destroyed and other people gain new jobs. There will be people whose jobs are transformed. But on a net basis, in a giant economy like ours, I have no doubt but that the economic trend lines will continue going to the right, and people's lives are going to keep getting better and better. A third topic that people talk about in terms of disruption is around regulation, whether AI should be regulated. And the answer is that probably will happen. And if it happens, it is as much the fault of the technology companies here in Silicon Valley who have not paid enough attention to issues such as loss of privacy and identity theft and the various other kinds of impacts of fake news and fake video on individuals and society. Our technology companies certainly have the AI horsepower to solve the problems if they chose to, but so far they have not chosen to. And so I believe if they don't change, the work will be done for them by governments through new regulations and laws. Having said all that, my strong belief is that the next 10 years are the golden age of AI. The last 10 years were the golden age of cloud computing and SaaS applications and SaaS solutions and business models based on the cloud. The next 10 years are years of great opportunity in AI. You can already see that the big tech companies, which have been playing in AI for the last 10 years, are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling their investments in AI going forward. You can see companies like Microsoft that have declared AI as their primary vision in the years going forward. You can see the activity of the venture capitalists who, in the last few years alone, have invested something like $20 billion in maybe 2,000 different companies. You can see the acceleration in terms of the number of companies being formed. And of course, you can see the market forecasts where AI solutions, independent of these giant tech companies, generated revenue of perhaps $1.5 billion last year, but that's expected to grow 50% a year to 30, 40, or $50 billion over the next 10 years. So enormous opportunity, but with every opportunity, there is a mindset that you as entrepreneurs have an option of applying or not applying. You have the opportunity to either be bold and try and build companies that will get to revenues of $100 million or more. You also have the opportunity of being namby-pamby and building little companies that do $5 million, $10 million in revenue. And yes, they may get acquired by Facebook for a large multiple or get acquired by some other tech company for a large multiple. But that's not, to me, taking full advantage of the opportunity. There are huge opportunities, not just in the B2C space, where you have dominant tech companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook, but just think about the business enterprise, think about education, think about healthcare, think about infrastructure. In each of these, there are multiple $100 million companies waiting to be built. Now, putting it in perspective, it is not as easy to build a $100 million company as one might think. And recently, I looked at the statistics of performance in Silicon Valley. Last 10,000 companies, startups, Silicon Valley, only 2.5% made it to $100 million organically. So if statistics was the driver of the future, and you wanted to build a $100 million company, your odds of success are 2.5%. Your odds of failure against that target are 97.5%. But I really don't believe that those statistics of the past reflect the statistics of the future. I think the way in which technology is evolving, the way in which each of you is rapidly developing as an entrepreneur, in many cases doing your second company, your third company, your fourth company, the odds of success get better and better. So I believe that a significant percentage of companies that are led by entrepreneurs who have a passion for wanting to build a company of scale, wanting to build a company that will make an enormous difference, are much, much higher. And that's why my belief is, in this golden age of AI, be bold or go home. Now, what does all this mean for me? personally. So before I answer that question, I'd like to ask all of you a question and see if someone will raise their hand. How many 70-year-olds do we have in the audience who are doing a startup? I see one, I see two, I see three, and I'm sure there are others I can't see. Welcome, brothers. We are all going to be in this together, and we're going to show all these young guys here how to do it right. Well done. Well, absolutely. I forget how it goes. Is 60 the new 70? Is 70 the new 60? But yeah. Over the last decades, I've built 36 companies. So I built my first two companies in Pittsburgh, the second one being American Robot, which I talked about. I built my third company in Silicon Valley, Aspect Development, which turned out to have a pretty good outcome. And then for the last 15 years, I've built Symphony Technology Group as a group of companies that deliver integrated data analytics and software solutions for different vertical markets like retail and healthcare. The last 15 years have been a phenomenal journey. We did 33 companies, invested $1.6 billion, and have already delivered about $10 billion in enterprise value from those companies, and journey's not over. There are still a number of companies left in the group. I was personally involved with either the startup or the transformation of probably 27, 28 of those 33 companies. So it was an extraordinary journey of learning, transformation, mentoring, execution over a 15-year period. 1 year ago, when I was about to celebrate my 70th birthday, it was a moment of self-reflection, and the question was, what do you do next? And my fundamental philosophy has always been to look forward and never look backwards. Whether I did things that I was unhappy about because they weren't successful, or I did things that were incredibly successful, didn't make any difference to me. Once it was done, and my eye was always on, and is always on, the future. So last year, I thought I would look forward the next 10 years, and I felt it was time for me to really close the loop. I feel that in the 1980s, I got sucked in by the hype of robotics and AI when it wasn't really ready for prime time. And here I could see ahead of me a 10-year golden age, and I just couldn't see passing it up. I just couldn't see that at all. So I started SymphonyAI Group, and the mission of SymphonyAI Group is to build a group of companies with AI at the core to create business-to-business AI solutions that help transform the business enterprise by driving revenue growth and operational excellence, and by doing it across a whole bunch of vertical sectors: healthcare, industrial, retail, consumer packaged goods, FinTech, and key horizontals such as IT and talent. Over the last roughly 10 months, we have already launched 8 companies. And since I'm a believer in building for scale and also building rapidly, I mean, ultimately, all these years of experience have to count for something. Otherwise, what the hell was the point of all these lessons learned? This year, these 8 companies of ours will do about $275 million in revenue from close to zero last year. So we are on a relatively fast track. Having said all that, I know that number sounds pretty impressive, but the goal I have for next year is around 400 to 500. And I want to be the first to tell you, with a sense of humility, that I have absolutely no idea how we're going to get there. What I do know is that I still have about 8 months in which to figure this out. So every day is really a journey of learning, experimenting, incubating, starting, and trying to make stuff happen. The strategy that we are pursuing is sort of around 3 dimensions. The first is that we are incubating our own companies. So we've set up something called Symphony Incubator, whose primary mission is to actually ideate, validate the ideas that we ideate, decide which ones are worth pursuing, build the products. If the initial lighthouse customers say that these make sense, we launch the company, hire the team, go build the company. A second part of the model is that we take smaller companies that we might acquire and put them through a process that I call AIification and completely transform the entire technology stack and every single component of their previous solutions into a brand new imagined set of solutions for the future of that marketplace. And the third is that we make investments in other companies as minority partners, because not every good idea is going to come from Symphony. There are thousands and thousands of fantastic entrepreneurs and great ideas that independently need funding, and so we take minority positions in companies as well. The biggest difference between the approach that we are taking and the approach that many venture capitalists take is that most VCs, not all, but most VCs, are putting their capital, the $20 billion that I talked about, into individual point solutions. When you do a point solution, the value proposition is generally harder to figure out. The potential for differentiation is typically less. The ultimate survivability of the company, and certainly the ability to build it to $100 million, is much more unlikely than if you take a bigger problem and actually develop a solution suite for it, which encompasses many different systems of intelligence. And we define a system of intelligence to be something which, a layer of AI, a layer of software that captures in real time and integrates data from internal data silos inside a business enterprise or external sources of information, and make this integrated information available in a holistic way to a set of AI models, AI applications, AI solutions that then translate it to the improvement of a process, the improvement of some important value proposition that the customer needs. In our case, focused on revenue growth and operational excellence for our business enterprise customers. Because we are taking this solution suite approach, it allows us to differentiate, hopefully deliver a higher value proposition, and ultimately hopefully create companies that will achieve this $100 million target that I talked about. In healthcare, we are building a company called Concerto Health AI, whose mission is to actually improve cancer care by enabling the concept of precision health, which means that each cancer patient gets treated with a very specific set of targeted therapies. And similarly, the drug companies that currently spend $5 billion developing and 10 years developing a new drug for cancer can shorten their drug development cycles, can shorten their clinical trial cycles, can improve their real-time analytics. And through this combination of benefits for the pharma companies, for the patients, for payers, for providers, that we can actually help improve cancer care. So in this case, we can actually help address a very important social and human need, and at the same time, perhaps build a company of some scale in the healthcare space. In the retail area, we're completely reimagining how food and grocery retailers should work, how they should engage with their customers, with consumers, and we are, inventing a whole new suite of AI solutions. And we are doing this vertical by vertical, industry by industry. So it's an incredibly exciting journey. Hopefully, next 10 years to build out something of truly interesting scale. But I must tell you that at age 70, I have actually never been more jazzed, more intellectually stimulated, and really, every day is an absolute blessing and a joy. Now, we can do all this, and we can imagine all kinds of interesting possibilities for AI in business. But I really believe that the biggest opportunity for AI goes way beyond business, and it's in helping billions of underprivileged people all over the world. All this talk you hear about doom and gloom is really coming from people mostly living in Silicon Valley or in beautiful homes in Santa Monica and Bel Air, and not really coming from people in other countries where the needs are so much more basic. Take India. Of course, all of us have origins there, and my foundation is doing initiatives there in entrepreneurship and skilling. And so when I meet the underprivileged and the undereducated, the underemployed, the underskilled, the one thing that absolutely comes across is what a transformational possibility AI has to change their lives. If we talk about AI revolution, in my opinion, it is much less about creating the next interesting algorithm or the next interesting solution. Yeah, those are all, given where we are in AI, I would say those are all actually evolutionary. But if you can go to a farmer in India or in Kenya or in Colombia or in Brazil and show them using AI how to plant the right crop on the right piece of soil at the right time, harvest it at the right time, and sell it at the right price based on all the environmental conditions, soil conditions, crop conditions, weather conditions, you can help that farmer double their income. If you can go to a primary school in India or in South Africa or in Nigeria and enhance what those teachers do, those underpaid teachers who often don't even show up for work, and enhance what they do with educational assistance, teaching these kids not just the curriculum, because the curriculum may not actually prepare them for the jobs of the future, but teach them the skills and competences that they need to be successful in their future lives using AI and providing them with a learning companion that, with or without the teacher, moves them ahead. What kind of extraordinary impact does that represent? If you take almost any field, whether it's healthcare, I'll take healthcare as an example. In India, the Prime Minister a few months ago announced a plan to help 500 million people get health insurance at government cost. Very noble objective. How do you execute it? So the Prime Minister's plan is to put in place 150,000 clinics to serve these 500 million people. Well, 150,000 clinics require 150,000 to 500,000 nurses. They require probably 1 million community health workers. And what if we could use AI to take the knowledge of the best primary care physician from an Apollo hospital or a Jaslok hospital in Bombay and make that same knowledge available at the fingertips of the nurse or the community health worker? We would be transforming the lives of 500 million people through health. So with these kinds of ideas, my younger brother Sunil and I decided to team up and launch a philanthropic initiative that we call the Wadhwani Institute for Artificial Intelligence, focused on social good. So this is the other side of the coin, where all the wealth or the net worth that's created from the business ventures gets recycled back to help others. And the idea of this Artificial Intelligence Institute for the Social Good is all about pragmatic, real-world applications of AI to solve problems like the ones I just talked about. The problems of healthcare for 500 million people in India and billions around the world, the problems of primary education, the problems of skilling, so that we can move the underprivileged up the ladder using AI. So on the one side, there's a business mission. Let's use AI, go build great companies. On the other side, all of you are smart. All of you are entrepreneurs. Most of you know AI. The ones who don't will know AI over the next few weeks, months, and years. How about applying some of that genius and some of that talent and some of that effort to helping the underprivileged with AI as well? So I'd like to end with 3 thoughts. The first is be bold. Build companies of scale that are going to matter. Whether they're $100 million or not really doesn't matter. Just focus on building companies of scale so that the impact you make with AI is also at scale. The second is be smart. AI, of course, has all kinds of positive possibilities, but it's really up to all of us to make sure that the dark side of AI never comes to pass. So be thoughtful, be safe in terms of the way you're applying AI. And then the third, and perhaps most important, is be generous. AI has this ability to help hundreds of millions of people. You have the brains, you have the passion to do it. Let's go do it. Let's go make this a great world with AI. Thank you. So, yeah.